In this video, you will understand the stream parameter of the ChatGPT API. This API is set to false by default. So let's see what happens when we run a prompt with stream set to false. I'm going to run this prompt using the default value of stream. So when stream is set to false, the API is going to return a response after the model has finished generating the complete response. Now, what happens when the stream parameter is set to true? Well, in that scenario, the API response is going to be streamed in chunks, allowing you to process and display the response incrementally. And that's exactly what happens when you use the playground, as the output is generated incrementally, instead of having to wait for the whole response to be ready for you when the stream parameter is set to false. So how does it work exactly? When you run a prompt with the stream parameter set to true, the initial response contains the model's first message or partial response. Then subsequent messages or responses are received as separate chunks, allowing you to display them in real time as they become available. The stream continues until it is terminated by the last message, which is data done. Streaming responses can be useful for creating interactive interfaces where you want to display output as it is generated, providing a more responsive and interactive user experience. You would need to handle the streaming response logic on the client side, continuously reading and processing the chunks until the output is complete. In summary, setting stream to false is going to provide the complete response at once, while setting it to true allows for incremental real-time streaming of the response. The choice depends on your specific use case and how you want to handle and display the output. Now let's change our code and use the stream parameter to display the prompt response incrementally. First, I'm going to create a new screen and call it stream.js. Then copy, paste the content of home.js in there. I'm going to change the code later. So for now, I'm just going to change the name of the React component to stream. Then I'm going to make changes to the server.js file. But before doing that, I'm going to create a new backup file to keep our old code. I'm going to call it server original.js. And then I'm going to go to the roots and add a new root for our stream component. So let's give it a path of /stream. And let's import it from screens. Now, the first thing we need to do is to create a persistence connection between the server and the client. Basically, the server is going to be sending events to the client, and as those events are received by the client, an action is going to be taken. Now, to understand this, let's run the prompt in the playground to understand the streaming process again. So, as you can see, events are sent by the server to the client, and whenever an event is received by the client, a piece of text is displayed in the results box. This can be done using an SSE connection. SSE stands for Server Sent Events, as our server is sending events to the client using this protocol. So we are using here a unidirectional communication protocol where a client establishes a persistence connection to a server. and the server can send events or updates over that connection. SSE is built on top of HTTP and provides a simple mechanism for server to client communication. So in the next video, you're going to create an SSE connection between the server and the client and listen to events from the server. In this video, you're going to start a stream between the API server and your application. So the first thing we're going to change is the run completion function, as our function this time is not going to send a single response to the client side, but it's going to receive events from the API server and then send them to the client as they are received. So first, I'm going to change the name of the function to something like startCompletionStream. And the first thing I'm going to change inside the function is adding a parameter stream, which I'm going to set to true. And in the function parameters, the create completion method, I'm going to add another object specifying the response type. Which is going to be stream. And that's an important parameter. Now the output of this function is going to be completely different from the output of the run completion function we had previously. Now, in order to handle the response, we're going to set some events. So whenever we receive a chunk of data, we want to do something about it. So rather than returning the response, I'm going to write response.data.onData. This means that whenever we receive data, we're going to run a function. So this function is going to take as a parameter the received data from the API or the ChatGPT API, and then we're going to do something about it. So for example, let's just console.log the data for now. So let's test our function. With a simple prompt, for example, cars are amazing because. So I'm going to save, and you can see that the server returns the data as a buffer. Now, in order for us to manipulate this buffer, we will need to transform it to another data type. So for example, if I console.log data.toString, then that will transform the buffer to a string, and now we can understand what's going on. So you can see all these chunks of data. They all start with data :space and then a JSON object. And the last one is data : done. Now, to make this data easier to manipulate, I'm going to delete this bit by replacing it with an empty string. So replace, and then a regular expression. So I'm going to use a caret, and then data : space. So I used a caret because I want to delete or look for this exact expression. So let's save and see what we get this time. And now we got rid of the data at the beginning of these responses. Now let's store this value inside a variable called message. Let's emit the data to our React application. So to do this, we're going to have a couple of cases. So we're going to check the value of message and see if it matches done or not, as the last message is done. So if message is not equal to done, then we're going to emit the data to the SSE connection. So we're going to need something called a completion emitter. So I'm going to create that later, but for now, this is how it works. So completion emitter dot emit the data, and the value of our data is message. So what is the completion emitter? The completion emitter is an event emitter which we use for sending stream data. So how do we build a completion emitter? So you will need the events module to get the event emitter constructor. So I'm going to use the structuring to require the module. It is normal to get an error as we have not created the completion emitter variable yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create an event emitter for sending stream data. So we called it completion emitter, and we're going to use the constructor event emitter to build it. I'm going to save, and now our application is running again. All right, so the emit method of our completion emitter takes a couple of parameters. So we've got the first one as data and the second one as the message. In the first parameter, you can use any string you like. Now, let's add our else statement. And that's if the message value is done, meaning that we reached the end of our stream. Now, we are going to emit just done, for example. And we are just notifying the stream completion. Now the next thing to do is to handle the post request. So whenever we send the prompts through the React application, we will need to start the completion stream. So we're going to change this code and start the completion stream right here. So how do we do that? We don't need to store the output in a variable, as this is completely different. We are using streams here. So we're going to start the completion stream right here using the startCompletionStream function, like this. After that, we need to listen to the events. So rather than returning a response at this stage, let's listen to the events. So this is something that you will do in the next video.